Octavian didn't defeat Cleopatra first with ships. Octavian defeated Cleopatra with a story. A story simple enough for a baker to repeat while kneading dough. A story sharp enough to turn friends into enemies. A story so sticky it lasted 2,000 years. Cleopatra wasn't a ruler. Cleopatra was a seductress. And once that label stuck, everything else about Cleopatra, languages, law, money, diplomacy, survival, got shoved off the table like it never mattered. If you've ever wondered why Cleopatra is remembered for romance more than statecraft, here's the uncomfortable answer. The image most people know was designed on purpose. Octavian needed Rome to accept a brutal civil war, accept one-man rule, and accept that the old republic was finished. That's a hard sell. Romans loved saying no kings, even while cheering for the next strongman who promised bread and order. So Octavian did what great political operators do when the truth is messy. Octavian picked one enemy, gave that enemy a face, and turned fear into unity. That face was Cleopatra, and to make the face unforgettable, Octavian used the fastest shortcut in politics: shame. Stay to the end, because once you see how the Seductress story was built, you'll never look at Cleopatra, Mark Antony, or Augustus the same way again. Before the smear campaign, Octavian had a problem bigger than Cleopatra. Octavian's real problem was Rome. Rome was tired of war. Rome was angry at elites. Rome was scared of chaos. Rome was addicted to strong leaders who promised stability. And Octavian was young. Octavian didn't have Julius Caesar's legendary aura. Octavian didn't have Mark Antony's battlefield reputation. Octavian had a name, a claim, and a ruthless brain. If Octavian framed the conflict honestly, the story sounded like this: two Roman leaders are fighting over power again. That story doesn't inspire loyalty. That story inspires eye-rolling. So Octavian reframed it. Octavian said the war wasn't Romans versus Romans. The war was Rome versus a foreign threat, and the foreign threat had a name: Cleopatra. From that moment, the conflict stopped being just a military contest. It became a competition over meaning. Who is the hero? Who is the villain? Who is Roman? Who is corruption? Who gets to define virtue? Octavian wanted Romans to stop seeing Mark Antony as a rival and start seeing Mark Antony as a victim. Not Antony chose badly. Antony was stolen. Stolen by whom? Cleopatra. That one twist made everything else possible. People sometimes talk about propaganda like one evil genius wrote one perfect speech and everyone nodded. Real propaganda is a team sport. Octavian's smear campaign came from Octavian himself, setting the message and the target's Octavian's inner circle, spreading and sharpening it, Roman institutions, giving it official weight, poets, and public voices, making it catchy everyday gossip, doing the rest for free. Octavian later became Augustus, and Augustus became the model for how to win and then control the story of winning. Octavian's circle included powerful allies like Marcus Agrippa and advisors like Maecenas. These people weren't just military and political helpers, they were message managers. Think of them as the ancient version of a war room, planning what to say, what to show, what to leak, and what to repeat until it becomes common sense. Octavian needed to accomplish four things at the same time: justify fighting Mark Antony without calling it a civil war, make Cleopatra the center of the threat, make Octavian look like the defender of Roman values, turn victory into legitimacy for a new political order. That's not spin. That's survival planning for a regime. Cleopatra was uniquely vulnerable to Roman propaganda, not because Cleopatra was weak, but because Cleopatra triggered Roman fears like a set of alarm bells. Octavian could point at Cleopatra and hit several pressure points at once. Foreignness Rome loved the idea that Rome ruled the world, but Rome also feared being influenced by outsiders, especially wealthy Eastern monarchs. Cleopatra could be painted as the East itself: rich, mysterious, luxurious, dangerous, morally soft in Roman stereotypes. Octavian didn't need to prove details. Octavian just needed to whisper, Rome is being pulled east. Romans hated kings, at least in public. The Republic was built on the proud claim that Rome had expelled kings centuries earlier. Even when Rome behaved like an empire, Romans wanted to believe they were free citizens, not subjects. Cleopatra was openly a monarch. So Octavian could say, This isn't civil war. This is a war against monarchy. That framing made Octavian look like the defender of freedom, even while Octavian was building one-man rule. Public power was male-coded: war, law, speech, command. A powerful woman wasn't only unusual, a powerful woman was treated like a glitch in the system. And here comes the propaganda trick that still shows up in many cultures. When a woman gains power, accuse her of gaining it through sex. It doesn't have to be fair, it only has to be repeatable. That's the core of Seductress Cleopatra. Cleopatra's court could be portrayed as refined, wealthy, and smart. Octavian turned that into a moral crime. Roman moral talk often treated luxury like poison. Too much pleasure supposedly made men weak, governments soft, and armies lazy. So Octavian built a simple equation. East equals luxury. Luxury equals corruption. Corruption equals collapse. And Cleopatra became the face of the equation. Octavian's propaganda did not start by shouting, "Mark Antony is evil." Octavian's propaganda started by saying, Mark Antony is not himself. Mark Antony had been corrupted. Mark Antony had been bewitched. Mark Antony had been enslaved. By whom? Cleopatra. This is brilliant for two reasons. It makes Mark Antony look weak without saying it directly. It makes the war feel like a rescue mission. Now, Octavian isn't fighting a rival. Octavian is saving Rome's honor from foreign corruption. It also creates a trap. If Mark Antony loses, Octavian claims Mark Antony was never truly Roman at the end. If Mark Antony wins, Octavian claims Mark Antony won through foreign poison. Either way, Cleopatra stays in the spotlight as the villain. Octavian's smear campaign wasn't one speech, it was a system. Rome didn't have television, Rome didn't have printing presses, but Rome had something just as powerful, a city designed for talk. Forums, temples, bathhouses, theatres, markets, dinners, courts. Rome was a giant amplifier. Octavian used every tool available. This is the foundation. A civil war feels shameful. A foreign war feels heroic. So Octavian pushed Rome toward declaring war on Cleopatra, not on Mark Antony. That single decision cleaned the story. Octavian became the defender of the state. Mark Antony became the traitor's tool. Cleopatra became the enemy outside the nation. Now Roman soldiers could tell themselves, I'm not killing Romans, I'm defending Rome. That's propaganda at its most effective. It changes how people feel about the same bloodshed. Octavian didn't debate tax rates or treaties in public messaging. Octavian used moral labels: virtue, discipline, purity, tradition, corruption, decadence. Once you define a conflict as virtue versus corruption, you don't need evidence. You need emotion, and emotion spreads. Octavian's narrative obsessed over feasts, perfumes, silk, gold, pearls, Eastern excess. Even if details were exaggerated, the mood was what mattered. If people feel disgust, they stop asking about facts. Luxury became evidence that Cleopatra was dangerous and that Mark Antony had lost Roman discipline. Instead of describing Cleopatra as a specific ruler with specific policies, Octavian's messaging often treated Cleopatra like a symbol of the East, not a person, an idea. That idea was painted as foreign gods, strange rituals, extravagant habits, sneaky diplomacy, emotional control. It's easier to hate a symbol than a human being. This is the heart of the seductress myth. Octavian's smear used a simple story engine. Cleopatra used sex to control powerful men. That story does three jobs at once. It explains Mark Antony's decisions without admitting Mark Antony might have chosen rationally. It denies Cleopatra's intelligence by replacing strategy with charm. It gives ordinary Romans a cheap feeling of superiority. We are virtuous, they are dirty. Sex is a powerful political shortcut because it triggers emotion fast. Jealousy, disgust, fear, fascination, and it's hard to disprove in public because defending yourself looks like protesting too much. Cleopatra also got painted as magical, unnatural, dangerous, not because Rome truly believed in spells the way a modern movie shows it, but because the idea of a foreign queen casting a spell fits the victim's story. Mark Antony didn't choose, Mark Antony was compelled. It's propaganda that turns agency into enchantment. Coins were the ancient world's constant media. A coin passed through thousands of hands. A coin quietly told you who mattered. Octavian minted imagery that signaled stability, tradition, Rome's gods, Roman identity, Octavian as the restorer. At the same time, the smear made Cleopatra the opposite: instability, temptation, foreign contamination. Coins gave comfort, speeches gave fear. Together they formed a persuasive loop. Octavian didn't only talk, Octavian staged. Roman politics loved ceremony: triumphs, public sacrifices, oath-taking games, temple dedications. These events weren't only entertainment, they were messaging. A public ritual says, "The gods approve." A public triumph says, "History agrees." A dedication says, "This is permanent." Octavian used ritual to make the new order feel natural, and Cleopatra's image was used as the before that had to be defeated. One famous move was the public use of Mark Antony's will. Whether every detail in later accounts is perfect or not, the strategy is clear. Obtain a private document, present it as proof of betrayal, trigger outrage, force everyone to react. Leaks work because they feel like truth escaping the shadows. Even if people doubt parts, the topic takes over. Octavian didn't need everyone to believe every word. Octavian needed everyone to talk about it. The most boring tactic is the most powerful. Repeat the same story until it feels obvious. Cleopatra controls Mark Antony. Cleopatra is corrupting Rome. Cleopatra represents foreign kingship. Octavian is saving the state. Once you hear something 10 times from 10 different mouths, your brain starts treating it like background truth. That's how myths are made. Rome didn't need a newspaper to spread a story. Rome had a simple pipeline. The Senate and courts created official talk. When a senator accused someone, it sounded serious. When a court case was mentioned, it sounded like proof. Patrons and clients carried the story outward. A wealthy patron hosted dinners. Clients repeated the talking points in public. The forum turned the story into street truth. People argued, mocked, and simplified. Every repetition shaved off nuance. The theatre and poetry turned the story into entertainment. Entertainment is easier to remember than policy. Coins, monuments, and rituals made the story feel permanent. You can ignore gossip. You can't ignore a statue staring at you in the city centre. So when Octavian launched a smear, Octavian wasn't tossing a pebble in a pond. Octavian was turning Rome's whole city life into a loudspeaker. Here is one of Octavian's smartest steps, and it's not glamorous. Octavian pushed for war to be framed as a war against Cleopatra, not against Mark Antony. That matters because it did 3 things at once. It made the war feel patriotic. Romans could hate Cleopatra without feeling guilty. It turned Mark Antony into a criminal without needing a fair debate. "You sided with the enemy" becomes the accusation. It gave Octavian legal and moral cover. A civil war is shameful, a foreign war is honorable. This is propaganda turning into policy. Once the state says Cleopatra is the enemy, every rumor about Cleopatra becomes war news. Every insult becomes defense of Rome. And that legal framing also helped Octavian pressure people. Support Octavian, or you look disloyal. Question Octavian, and you look like you're helping Cleopatra. It's a trap that forces alignment. If Octavian needed one big headline to hook the public, the donations of Alexandria were perfect. In simple terms, Mark Antony held a grand ceremony in Alexandria and publicly announced territories and titles for Cleopatra and Cleopatra's children. Even if the real administrative effect was complicated, the symbolism was loud. To a Roman audience, Octavian could frame it like this: Mark Antony is giving Roman lands away. Mark Antony is crowning a foreign dynasty. Mark Antony is moving the center of power east. Mark Antony is building a monarchy that replaces Rome. Octavian didn't need Romans to understand eastern border politics. Octavian needed Romans to feel a gut punch. Our general is making a queen into a ruler over Romans, and Octavian could sharpen the fear with a simple phrase, Queen of Kings. That phrase is propaganda gold. It sounds like monarchy, foreign dominance, humiliation, the end of the Republic. So the donations became more than a ceremony. They became the emotional proof that Octavian's story was true. A smear campaign works best when it comes with an alternative. Octavian presented Octavian's own image as the opposite of Cleopatra's stereotype. Octavian emphasized simplicity, discipline, Roman tradition, respect for the gods' order after chaos, family, and stability. The details could be messy in reality, but propaganda is not a courtroom. Propaganda is a mood. Octavian's mood was, "I am the cure." Cleopatra's mood in the story Octavian told was, "She is the disease." That's why Cleopatra's luxury mattered so much in the smear. It wasn't just envy, it was a story device. If Octavian looks modest next to Cleopatra's excess, Octavian looks like a moral hero without doing anything heroic. Octavian's messaging didn't only attack Cleopatra. Octavian used Cleopatra to attack Mark Antony's masculinity and authority. Rome's political insults were brutal and personal. A powerful male rival could be damaged by the suggestion, Mark Antony is weak. Mark Antony is controlled. Mark Antony is no longer Roman in spirit. Mark Antony is living like a king, not like a citizen. Mark Antony is obeying a woman. Octavian didn't have to shout these claims directly all the time. Octavian's campaign just had to make the idea available. Then Roman gossip did the rest. In a society that valued male dominance, the phrase "ruled by a woman" wasn't neutral. It was a political execution in words. Another tool was the alleged exposure of Mark Antony's will. The reason the will story is powerful is psychological. A rumor feels optional. A document feels final. Once the public believes there is a written plan to favor Cleopatra and Cleopatra's children, outrage becomes easier. Even people who don't care about Cleopatra personally start caring because it sounds like national betrayal. Octavian understood that format matters. A claim delivered as "I heard" is weaker than a claim delivered as "it's written." That's why leaks are still powerful today. This part is important. Cleopatra was not helpless, but Cleopatra's tools were limited inside Rome. Cleopatra could shape imagery in Egypt. Cleopatra could negotiate with leaders. Cleopatra could present legitimacy at home through religion and tradition. But Cleopatra could not easily stand in the Roman Forum and argue her case, control Roman poets and rumor networks, stop senators from using her name as a weapon, outshout Octavian inside Octavian's own city. Even if Cleopatra sent messages, Rome could twist them. Even if Cleopatra stayed silent, Rome could invent words for her. And because Rome's public sphere was already biased against powerful foreign women, Cleopatra was fighting uphill. So the smear worked partly because the battlefield was unfair. Octavian had home field advantage, and Octavian knew exactly how to use it. The Seductress story did something deeply comforting for Roman audiences. It let Romans believe Mark Antony didn't choose a rival political strategy. Mark Antony was tricked. Rome didn't lose control because Rome's system was broken. Rome lost control because of one foreign woman. The Republic didn't collapse because of Roman ambition and inequality. The Republic collapsed because of corruption. In other words, the story let Rome avoid blaming Rome. And that's why the story spread so fast. Now we can answer the big question. Why did it work so well? Because Octavian's story didn't invent fear from nothing. Octavian's story plugged into fears Rome already had. Could be political death in Rome. Cleopatra was a queen. That alone was enough to make some Romans uneasy. Octavian used that discomfort like a lever. Many Romans believed the Republic was collapsing because citizens had become greedy and soft. Octavian offered a satisfying villain, Cleopatra, the symbol of luxury and excess. This let Romans avoid a harder truth. Rome's problems came from Rome's own violence and inequality. Blaming Cleopatra was easier than looking in the mirror. Rome had a long tradition of stereotyping the Eastern Mediterranean as rich, crafty, decadent, unmanly. Suspicious Cleopatra's Egyptian Greek court was an easy target for those stereotypes. Complex politics is tiring. After years of civil war, many Romans wanted one clean answer. This is why everything went wrong. Octavian gave them that answer. The dangerous woman story is powerful because it personalizes fear. Instead of debating systems, you can blame a person. Instead of admitting men seek power, you can say men were tricked. Instead of naming ambition, you can name temptation. Octavian didn't just smear Cleopatra. Octavian offered Romans a comforting lie about themselves. A smear campaign isn't truly successful until it outlives the person who started it. Octavian's story outlived Octavian because it got baked into literature and history. The problem of sources, Cleopatra didn't leave a stack of surviving books explaining her side. Most of what later generations read came through Roman and Greek writers living under Roman power. That doesn't mean every writer lied on purpose. It means the starting material was already tilted. Imagine writing history using mostly the winner's notes. You can be honest and still end up repeating the winner's framing. After Octavian became Augustus, open disagreement became risky. People learned quickly what kinds of stories were safe. Augustus saved Rome. The civil war was necessary. Cleopatra was a foreign threat. Mark Antony was a cautionary tale. When one story becomes safe, it becomes common. Later writers who carried the image over time, writers like Plutarch, Cassius Dio, Suetonius, Appian, and others shaped the popular picture. Many of these writers were far from Cleopatra's lifetime. They worked with earlier accounts, gossip, official narratives, and cultural memory already influenced by Augustan propaganda. And because Cleopatra's story was dramatic, writers leaned into it. Drama is sticky. A few names and what they added, Plutarch wrote biographies meant to teach moral lessons, not to file neutral reports. Plutarch loved character, personality, and dramatic scenes. Cleopatra fit perfectly. Cassius Dio wrote under the empire and often explained events through the lens Rome preferred. Stability good, rivals dangerous. Suetonius loved scandal and private detail. When your source loves scandal, the seductress frame gets stronger. Appian and other historians worked with Roman records and traditions shaped by the winners. Even when they tried to be fair, the starting story was already leaning. This is how a smear lasts. Later writers keep repeating the same early framing, sometimes adding new drama until the drama feels like evidence. Then the story crossed into moral preaching. As centuries passed, Cleopatra stopped being only a political rival. Cleopatra became a moral symbol. In later Roman and then Christian-influenced writing, Cleopatra often appears as temptation, luxury, pagan excess, the dangerous woman who ruins men. Once Cleopatra becomes a moral symbol, the details of policy and strategy get pushed out. Moral stories don't like spreadsheets. Moral stories like villains. And then the story crossed into theatre. Love's two things. Love Doom, a careful administrator managing grain shipments and temple politics, is historically important, but it's not stage-friendly. A queen and a Roman general in a tragic spiral, that sells tickets. So the seductress frame gained another boost through drama and poetry. Each retelling simplified the characters more. Cleopatra becomes desire. Mark Antony becomes weakness. Octavian becomes cold order. And Shakespeare didn't invent the romance, but Shakespeare helped lock it into European imagination. Once you get a beautiful tragic romance on stage, most people don't ask, what about the tax system? They ask, who broke whose heart? So Cleopatra became a cultural archetype, not a historical person. And then modern film poured gasoline on it. Hollywood loves visual shortcuts. Glamour gold, eyeliner, silk scandal. Film can show a banquet in 5 seconds. Film can't easily show a decade of administrative reform without losing the audience. So modern media inherited Augustus's framing because Augustus's framing is cinematic. It's flashy, it's easy, it's emotional. That's why the smear is still alive. The seductress story is easy to film, easy to headline, and easy to sell. Why later writers loved the seductress frame because it's easy. A complicated ruler requires context, economics, diplomacy, internal politics, administrative detail. A seductress story requires desire, jealousy, scandal, moral warning. Human brains love moral warning tales. They feel useful even when they're wrong. So the myth spread through biography, style histories, moral essays, theatre, retellings later. European writing, eventually modern film. Each retelling polished the same stereotype until it looked like truth. This is the tragedy of the smear. When you call Cleopatra a seductress, you erase the things that make Cleopatra historically interesting. Cleopatra wasn't only a relationship partner. Cleopatra was a ruler who had to manage a fragile dynasty, Roman interference, economic stability, grain exports that fed Rome court intrigue, religious legitimacy, inside Egypt foreign diplomacy, across the Eastern Mediterranean information flow and messaging alliances that could collapse overnight. The Seductress label turns all of that into a soap opera. It's not just unfair, it's politically useful, because if Cleopatra is remembered as just charm, then Rome doesn't have to admit Cleopatra challenged Rome with skill. A quick reality check. If Cleopatra were truly shallow, Octavian wouldn't need a massive propaganda machine to destroy Cleopatra's reputation. Octavian would just win and move on. The fact that Octavian kept shaping the story tells you something. Cleopatra was a rival model of power, and rival models must be ridiculed, not studied. After Actium, Octavian won the war in the world. Now Octavian had to win the war in memory, and Octavian had a practical reason to keep the story tight. Egypt was about to become Rome's private prize. Egypt wasn't treated like a normal conquered place. Egypt was too rich, too strategic, and too important for grain. Octavian didn't want ambitious senators marching into Egypt, grabbing its money, and coming back with enough power to challenge him. So Octavian kept Egypt unusually close to the new regime. That move could look suspicious if people asked the wrong questions. Why does Octavian keep Egypt for himself? Is Octavian becoming the very thing Rome hates? One man holding everything. Was this really about saving the Republic, or about building a new monarchy? The Seductress myth helped answer those questions before they were even asked. If Cleopatra is painted as a foreign danger that almost captured Rome, then Octavian's tight control of Egypt looks like protection, not greed. Now Octavian's power looks necessary. Now the new order looks like safety. Now Augustus can say, "I did this for Rome," and many people will believe it. Octavian's smear helped Octavian do three things after victory: justify the violence as defense of Rome, make Octavian's power look like restoration, not takeover, make the new order feel necessary. Even righteous Cleopatra's death ended the military problem. Cleopatra's reputation had to be managed so Cleopatra wouldn't become a symbol for resistance. So the story stayed loud. Cleopatra was temptation. Cleopatra was foreign corruption. Cleopatra was the reason a Roman hero fell. That way, Augustus could stand as the cure. This isn't only ancient history. Octavian's playbook shows patterns you can spot in any era. Here are the warning signs. A complex political struggle gets reduced to one villain. The villain is described with emotional labels, not specific actions. Private life becomes public weaponry. A leader presents himself as the only cure. Neutrality becomes shameful. Repetition replaces evidence. And there's one more sign. When the story focuses on someone's character flaws, so much that nobody is allowed to talk about structures, money, law, power, institutions, that's usually propaganda, because real power is usually boring in detail, and propaganda hates boring detail. Cleopatra was defeated once in war. Cleopatra was defeated a second time in reputation. That second defeat was so complete that many people today still repeat Augustus's messaging without realizing it. That's why this story matters, because if you can rewrite one ruler as a stereotype, you can rewrite any ruler as a stereotype. And if you can do it once, you can do it forever. Octavian didn't invent the seductress myth out of thin air. Octavian built it from Rome's existing fears: fear of kings, fear of foreign influence, fear of moral decline, fear of women with power. Then Octavian amplified it with a full messaging system: moral language over policy luxury as evidence, sexual shame leaks, and scandal public ritual coins as constant reminders, repetition until it became common sense. And later writers carried the story forward because it was dramatic, useful, and easy to retell. So if you want to remember Cleopatra honestly, remember this: Cleopatra was not a seductress who accidentally touched history. Cleopatra was a ruler strong enough that Augustus had to destroy Cleopatra's image to protect Rome's new order. That alone tells you how dangerous Cleopatra really was. If you want the other side of Cleopatra, strategy instead of stereotype, watch the Cleopatra Spy Network video next, because Cleopatra's real war against Rome was fought with information long before it was fought with chips.